Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, April 15th. This is the Transportation and Environment Committee, and we are taking up the FY25 operating budget today. The Department of Transportation General Fund is the first item of four that we will be taking up. We'll be talking about the General Fund, the Mass Transit Fund, the FY25-30 CIP revisions, and then the fourth item is our Vision Zero NDA. And all of these items are critically important to ensuring the safety of our residents as they travel throughout our community. And the first item of the General Fund, the county executive is proposing $56 million, and there are some notable increases there, including leaf vacuuming fund and grant access funds and other programs, including new and enhanced programs like the slurry seal program and the traffic marking program. But I will allow our folks and friends from DOT to explain those further. So I will turn it over to Mr. Kenny to walk us through that packet.
Thank you. So the increase to the general fund, leaf vacuuming funds, as well as the grant fund, can all be found on the right at the beginning of the packet, an overview. But before we dive into the individual programmatic increases, I wanted to go over two items that cover the entirety of our budget process here. First is the Council President's budget approach. The Council President has expressed concern that the Executive's recommended operating budget continues a long-term dichotomy between expenditures and revenues that has created structural issues within the county budget. The budget as proposed creates a structural imbalance for FY26 that staff conservatively estimates at $115 million. Council had a work session last week to discuss this, had some level setting there. I say this to sort of tee up the fact that this packet will automatically place new or enhanced programs according to the Council President's approach on this new and enhanced programs list. So we're happy to talk about those today, but those will go on that list for further consideration throughout the budget process. And council staff has worked to identify potential reductions to departmental base budgets. And that is all included in further detail in Council President's budget approach further on in the packet. It's attached. Next is the equity score from the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. They put out an operating budget equity tool, which is designed to help departments articulate the way in which their proposed budget supports their commitments to advancing racial equity and social justice while providing decision makers with insights regarding the racial equity and social justice impacts of the proposed budget. The FY 2025 operating budget equity tool provided the Montgomery County Department of Transportation with a score of 6 out of 11, explained by the longer narrative justification contained within the packet. This is a good score as relative to other county departments. However, council staff has engaged with MCDOT that DOT has expressed commitment to further improving its approach to racial equity and social justice, and is engaged in dialogue with ORESJ to identify exactly where those improvements can be made. But that is context for and with that longer narrative justification for the remainder of the budget. The committee have any points or questions on those first two items before we dive in?
We're good. Thank you.
So the little over $5 million increase to the general fund, leaf vacuuming fund, and grant funds, as recommended by the county executive, covers both changes that result in service changes and those that do not change service. Of the changes that do change service, the increases will be added to the new and enhanced program list. And those 5 such changes can be found in the first table on page 3 of the packet. These are the enhancement, some of which you mentioned earlier, so the enhancement to the residential resurfacing slurry seal program to make progress towards the recommended annual appropriation levels recommended by the Infrastructure Maintenance Task Force. Second is the enhancement of, or rather, that first one was for $700,000 increase. The second is a $500,000 increase to the tree removal and planting program. The substantial portion of which will go towards enhancing stump removal activities, which has been a point of discussion in this committee before. The next is a $435,000 enhancement of the traffic markings program to increase crosswalk, intersection, and centerline markings. The third is a $30,000 enhancement of the new subdivision roads maintenance program. This is a routine addition that the budget often will make to maintain roads of newly constructed subdivisions. And the last being a $25,000 increase to enhance the inspection of short span bridges, to increase bridge inspections and account for increased contractor costs. So each of these will go on the new and enhanced program list, but before we move on, does the committee have any questions?
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Kenny. Can you also, while we just talked about the 5 additions, can you also just mention the decreases so that we can have that as part of the fuller conversation on this
Yes.
item?
So there are, in addition to these 5 service increases, there were 2 decreases that will impact service. These count towards the council's effort under the county council president's budget approach to reduce base budgets. These are, for one, the $100,000 decrease in the elimination of temporary, unprotected, on-street bike lane reviews. This is because the MCDOT is moving in a direction of more protected bike lane projects and was finding that they needed to do unprotected bike lane reviews that would then be made obsolete by protected bike lane projects. So that increase comes from there. And the second is an $121,000 or almost $122,000 reduction in the bike share program's low utilization stations as determined by station performance, life cycle, and density. DOT can speak more to that process. But
Great.
Those are the 2 decreases.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kenny. Director Conklin, nice to see you this morning, you and
Good
your
morning.
team that are here. I have a few questions. I suspect we all have the same questions here, but $500,000 for what is noted as tree removal and planting, great, right? We fully support more trees and the removal of the stumps. How many stumps do you expect that to be able to cover?
I'll ask Mr. Dorsey to join
There
us
you
to
go.
answer these questions.
Thank you.
Good morning, council members. So the $500,000 would allow us to remove approximately 1,100 stumps.
1,100.
Yes.
That's great. Very good. And what is the backlog currently?
The backlog is 11,800.
So let's say that another. Let's put a positive spin on the
10%.
news you're sharing.
So we technically look at the stumps in our budget, and we remove about 2,500 a year. This would add additional 1,100, so that'll get us to 3,600 stumps that we'll be able to remove if we are afforded the additional 500,000.
Very good. Making progress there. So that is good. And that $500,000 is nearly all slated for, or is it all slated for stump removal?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Also recognizing that earlier this year, we updated the tree ordinance, right? So we have other street tree fees that are going to help plant more trees, and the 10,000 trees that were not planted because of the discrepancy in that funding, hopefully we'll catch up there. The sidewalk, the traffic markings, really important as well as we continue doing that work. Not only making our roads safer, but also implementing the various aspects of the State Safe Streets Act. We're good, Mr. Paler, so thank you. The one other question I have is regarding the decrease in services. Two questions, actually. So the $100,000 for the elimination of the reviews for unprotected on-street bike lanes, it says that there are no changes to staffing levels. Can you reconcile how the $100,000 decrease does not equate to any personnel changes?
These were typically tasks that would be given to traffic engineering consulting firms when Richard's division, the highway division, would identify repaving projects for the upcoming cycle. The traffic division would get a list of those and then issue a consultant task order request to review those projects to see if there was an opportunity to do conventional bike lane installation with those repaving projects. That was instituted at a time where conventional bike lanes were the recommended treatment for bike facilities on county roads, which is no longer the case. They're sort of a provisional treatment in advance of implementing the bicycle master plan recommendations, which are largely protected bikeways. So the work efforts in that program have tailed off. We haven't had any paving projects in the last year or two that have implemented the bike lanes, so it appears that this program has sort of outlived its usefulness, and we're proposing it for elimination for that reason.
And so the good news here is the $100,000 reduction is an acknowledgement that we are doing protected bike lanes, so the funding for unprotected is not necessary.
Correct.
Good. And then last question, the $122,000 reduction for bike share, where do you expect these reduced
I'll let Mr.
reductions?
Tamano speak a little bit more to that. He has statistics on the bike share utilization.
Great, thank you.
The bike share program in the county was expanded at a very rapid pace, and a number of the expansions were based on new development application requirements. As those stations have been put into place, we've seen some stations with very low utilization and productivity, and we're paying on a per dock basis for the maintenance and operation of those facilities. In the past year, we have identified a few that have been transferred. The funding has been transferred to municipal funding in the city of Rockville, and we've identified a few more that are unproductive stations, and we could save the operating funds associated with them. So, Joe's, go ahead and speak to what those look like.
Good morning, council members. So we did look at data for the past 2 years, and a typical station in a high-performing area has anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 trips either starting or ending at that station. And these lower-performing stations have anywhere from 50 to 250 trips, so a fraction of what a high-performing network would do, so less than 2 to 5%. So those were identified. They're primarily in the outskirts, so not in the core downtown areas like maybe Shady Grove area or Great Seneca area. So those are the areas. So we've identified the stations, and we want to make sure that they are low performing and they don't have any impacts in terms of the core network and the density, because density is what helps the overall bike share program work more efficiently.
Can you elaborate on the stations that are targeted for that reduction?
Sure. We have a tentative list. We haven't yet finalized that list, but there's a few stations that we've identified here. There's a Shady Grove Hospital one. We have the list here, and we can provide that list as we finalize it.
Yeah, I don't think it was included in any of the budget information, so
Correct.
if you can share that. I'm sure my colleagues want to dive deeper into that, so I'll yield to anyone. Vice President Stewart.
Great. I'll start there and then go backwards, because I think many of the things the chair raised already. For the stations that may be closed, is there a way to augment working with some of the companies that we partner with on the dockless bike share? Has that been looked at?
Dockless bike share or scooters generally,
Yes,
now there aren't
yeah.
many bikes left, is generally available in these areas. Again, there's not a high density of scooters in those locations, but they're principally in Rockville and the area in the Great Seneca Science area around Rockville.
That's correct. And most of the dockless activities in the cores, like Silver Spring or Bethesda.
We don't
Right.
direct them where to put those.
Well, I'm sure my
scooters.
colleague will have some other questions on that in a moment. But just want to say thank you on the stump removal program, on that. And also just wanted to add the program on the Slurley Seal program and lifting up the Infrastructure Maintenance Task Force report. You know, that's just something we've brought up in the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, how far behind we are on these projects, and I'm glad to see that we are using funds to help us catch up on that. So anyway, I just wanted to add my thanks, and I think the chair covered everything else.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Balcombe.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. So I agree with Council Vice President Stewart in terms of it's nice to look at some of these backlogs and to, if we can increase funding to get up to speed, I think that's great. And certainly both of the first two, the slurry seal and the stump removal, very important. And to the Chair Glass's perspective of the enhancement of traffic markings just goes right into what we've been talking about in terms of safe streets and safety. So appreciate that. The bike share program, you know, I'm very familiar with Shady Grove Hospital and certainly the University's of Shady Grove station, that area. It's never been utilized, so I appreciate saving money in that regard. Although we have the master plan, the Great Seneca Science Corridor master plan, moving forward. This, I think we're going to see it this summer, and as that whole area changes, the master plan calls for a significant change. We'll see how that looks. I think that's an area that we need to continue to look at further down the road. Of course, technology changes. These bike share programs, they came on right at an interesting time in technology, and so who knows what the future brings. But just keep in mind that the master plan calls for a much different density in that location. I do have a question about, and I think it goes here, the vacancies and repurposing of vacancies. I tried doing the math of, we're adding the lapse, we're eliminating last year's lapse, adding this year's lapse. Can we just talk a little bit about vacancies and where we are in terms of reducing positions? The question is, I see there's reductions in FTEs. Are all the reductions that you're anticipating vacant positions?
Yes. Councilmember Balcombe, there were a number of positions in our highway division that were zeroed out many years ago. They've been sitting on the books. One of the things we're doing with this is repurposing them over to work on capital projects, particularly the BRT projects. When all the state funding was added for the BRT projects within the last couple of years, we did not add positions to work on that. We tried to rely more on consultants. As we get into the federal process, we need to demonstrate to them that we have a good team of both consultants and on-board county staff. To manage those consultants, we also need some of that staff. So a lot of this is being used in the position slots, taking them out of the general fund and funding them from the capital budget with money that already exists there.
Okay, and then thank you. So from the FTEs that you currently have, what is your vacancy rate in that regard?
We were, I don't have the numbers in front of me. Back, if I recall correctly, in early December, we had about 200 vacancies throughout the department. This includes transit, this includes the PLDs, everything there. We were down, I believe, at the end of February to somewhere around 170. We've been making great progress, particularly in the area where CDL drivers, that was both bus operators and highway workers, that whole industry is starting to kind of normalize, and we're starting to ramp up our hiring there. We're about to go through a process internal analysis next week. I'll have updated numbers. I can ship those over to you once we have all that condensed.
Yeah.
But we've significantly whittled down the number of vacancies that were 1 year or older.
Okay, thank you. And you're confident that the trend is going to continue, that you'll be able to fill these positions reasonably?
Yeah, I think we're still struggling in the professional market, engineers and planners, but as I said, the CDL workers, bus operators, and equipment operators, we're seeing different candidate pools in those areas. That was, maybe 3-4 applicants. Now we're seeing 20, 30 and able to fill the positions as we go through.
I don't think our administrative hurdle is what's preventing our hiring in the professional services ranks. It's more workplace location is a challenge. A lot of these positions are in the public safety headquarters in Gaithersburg, which is not a particularly easy place to draw from the entire regional workforce pool towards due to its lack of metro access. And the compensation challenge is real. We are struggling to compete with private sector employers in the planning and engineering fields where, there's a real demand for these workers, and our pay scales are a little bit below what could be offered by those. Maybe not if you look at total compensation, but it's difficult to make that case sometimes in the heat of somebody trying to pick a job opportunity, that total compensation versus the paycheck they're going to get every week. It's not always obvious to them, the value difference there.
And the vacancies, those specific vacancies, what is the impact on service of those vacancies?
Go ahead.
We're often filling those vacancies either through, like in transit, it's a matter of overtime. We have to have the drivers drive a little bit more. Coming out of the pandemic, we were trying to adjust the service levels as we restored back to pre-pandemic service levels. Most of the professional positions, people working on the CIP, operating programs, they're filled in with consultants and contractors. We were lobbying last year as lapses were increased, that was a challenge for us because we needed that flexibility to use the personnel costs to hire the contractors and consultants. But that's balancing itself out now. The lapse money is being restored. The positions are getting filled. So we're really starting to normalize on that front across the department.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I just want to pick up on 2 points. One, the questions that Councilmember Balcombe just asked, and Director Conklin, you noted that some of the positions are at the public safety headquarters. What were those positions again?
Those are our planning and engineering positions. The Division of Transportation Engineering and Traffic Engineering that would hire those folks are both in that Gaithersburg facility. And a lot of the younger staff that are working in other agencies are, Arlington, Alexandria, District of Columbia, Department of Transportation, and it's a very different work environment that those young early career employees are a little bit less interested in that sort of work location.
That is the same reason that Marriott moved from its suburban office park into downtown Bethesda. And so the question is, what have the conversations been about maybe utilizing some of the space in the Park and Planning Building where DOE DOE, I'm thinking of the state, DEP utilize and some other agencies?
Those are active and ongoing conversations about how to diversify the number and type of work locations that we have. What we've been embarked on now is converting most of our space in the EOB to hotel-style office so that we can bring more people on a not everyday basis, but on a a basis where they can have a more convenient work location and be more accessible for meetings and things. And we have talked with DGS about increasing the number of transit-accessible work locations that we have available, particularly as we bring on larger teams for some of these BRT projects, like the Veers Mill Road Corridor and the Wheaton Building is one of the options we're exploring.
Great, thank you. All that is good to hear. One more question for you regarding the reduction in FTEs in the packet on page 4. If I heard you correctly, those reductions are being repurposed elsewhere, correct?
That's correct. They're moving from highway services to transportation engineering.
Okay, so it might seem like a reduction right here, but they will show up elsewhere.
They show up in capital budget.
Very good.
Those costs are already budgeted for in the projects.
Thank you. And Mr. Tamana, one more question for you regarding bike share. You noted that, can you be a little bit more specific about the utilization rates of some of those locations? You said there's only a handful of either rentals or riders at some of those places?
That's right. So compared to a high-performing station, which we would assume is, let's say, 100% utilization, these stations would be anywhere between 2 to 5% of that high-performing station. So the comparison is stark. There's very few trips happening, either starting or ending at these stations.
And is the information available regarding the number of actual riders? Is it really just a dozen or so people who are the only ones utilizing those spaces?
I do not have the rider information. We look at it by trip. So we know that there's a trip starting or ending at that station. We do not know whether it's the same rider or a different rider. I don't have that level of detail with me yet. It could potentially be lower if that is the case, yes.
And looking at it through a different lens, when you provide us with this information, or if you have it available now, do you know what the total rider cost per trip is at those higher end locations versus the lower utilization locations?
I do not have that information, but in my discussions with the bike share folks, they look at it more from the entire region perspective, because they're doing this in the total region. And so when the total trips and revenues are decided, it's more of a regional effort, and then they categorize the cost based on the total region's performance, not just what's happening in the county.
But we have costs, fixed cost for the docks themselves, right?
Sure, we do.
So
yes.
if there's a dock or 2 docks and we know that there's only a handful of riders, we can easily find out the cost per trip based on that math, right?
Yes, we could.
I think that would be helpful, because I have no doubt there are going to be people who are concerned about this, and what we need to do is share that tax dollars might be best to support broader transportation efforts rather than subsidizing a handful of users in a few locations from a cost per trip analysis.
Absolutely. We can gather that information.
Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, yes, OMB.
Greg Bruno, OMB. I'd just like to point out that there are some long-term vacancies that are being eliminated, and as well as being repurposed.
Going back to the point I made on page 5 or page 4 in the packet?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Kenny, we'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. So those are the service impact changes. As you referenced partially already, the changes listed, both increases and decreases in the larger table on page 4 cover all the changes that will not have impacts on services. You'll note the biggest ticket items there have to do with compensation, which we will, the council will address through the GEO committee. There are, as we were talking about before, the repurposing and elimination of vacancies and other positions are reflected in each. I'll note that there's an error in my packet. The bottommost line of the leaf vacuuming fund section should be negative 183,000, not 183,000. It's a repurposing of vacancies. You'll see the decrease in 2.4 FTEs. Does the committee have any items they'd like to discuss here further?
I think we're okay.
Great. And then we don't have to go into too much detail in section D. It just walks through each of the, it basically sorts all of the increases and decreases by program and provides more information for the record on each of these 7 programs that fund the MCDOT's general fund divisions that are the traffic engineering and operations, highway services, and portions of the transportation engineering and the director's office. Does the committee have any items they'd like to discuss from there? Again, these are the same items that we discussed in the prior section, just sorted differently.
Thank you.
All right. And unless the committee has any other questions, I believe that covers item 1.
Let me just look real quick. I do want to circle back to the, where is it? The parking, where is that? What? Number 3, the parking outside of the parking districts.
Yes.
I know that there's been lots of conversations, particularly as the council passed the ZTA supporting eliminating the parking minimums, right? And a number of community members in and around the half-mile to mile radius of various transit nodes have expressed concern about what that means in their communities moving forward. And we talked about, I have shared with them the residential permit parking program. And so in the future, there might be more requests for those programs. But one other issue I just want to bring up, and I know this is close to Vice President Stewart as well, the Quebec Terrace neighborhood, something that we've been working on, all of us, for a while. Do you have any updates, do you know, about some of the communities that are far outside the parking districts but still trying to determine their parking situations?
As I understand it, that community hasn't moved forward with instituting the RPP program that was specifically authorized in law and regulation for that, which is a very different model than all the other RPP locations where there's, in that particular location, there's a proposal to ration parking spaces by residential units. And as I understand it, that community hasn't moved forward with implementing that. And there's been some other work to try to understand whether that program could expand to parking lot locations that are owned by a combination of State Highway Administration and the Parks Department. And I don't think that has progressed either. But Michael Paler from the Traffic Division may have a more specific update on his work with that community.
Well, good morning. Michael Paler, Chief of Traffic Engineering and Operations. The short of that is Chris is correct. There have not been any updates beyond what he has spoken about.
Okay. And Director Conklin, the reason I ask is because it is a very unique situation, as you noted, and not only the residents, the property management, SHA, parks, right, trying to figure this out, and it is a tough one, but I continue to get communication, as I know Vice President Stewart does, from residents who come home coming home after working their second job and almost getting into fisticuffs about parking situations. So it's something that we need to work through, but we can talk offline about that.
I was going to say, just to add a little bit more to that, we did reach back out to our community contact. The DOT reached out to the community contact. I believe now it's been about 3 weeks, and asked them to, if they were still interested in advancing the particular aspects of soliciting input from the community so that we could move forward with these parking space assignments. We haven't heard anything back. So we've been trying to maintain regular communication with their contact persons.
3 weeks is recent, right, relatively speaking, so I'm glad to know about that. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're all good with these series, so without objection, we'll support items within Agenda 1. Great, thank you. The next agenda item is the Mass Transit Fund. And the FY25 recommended budget for the Mass Transit Fund is approximately $194 million. And this fund houses several programs and initiatives to help maintain and improve Montgomery County's transportation network, like Ride-On. And as Ride-On is the second largest transit system in the region, we have approximately 377 ADA accessible buses, 71,000 riders daily, depending on the day and their work schedule, and nearly 5,400 bus stops. And so every time someone asks us about bus stops, there are a lot of bus stops to improve upon. We're working on that. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Kenny to walk us through.
Thank you. So you'll see on the first page of the packet, once again, an overview of the changes to the transit services budget. See an almost $14 million in this 8% net increase in the Mass Transit Fund portions of the program, and a much smaller, about $5,000 increase in the grant fund portions. Again, included in this overview is the council president's budget approach. However, the only addition to there are two additions to the new and enhanced programs list. The first one and largest being a $3.5 million addition to transit services for the Great Seneca Transit Network, which this committee has touched many times, but is generally a four-route planned bus network intended to provide transit connections to and around the Life Sciences Center in Gaithersburg. The fully planned system includes 4 lines, but this addition of $3.5 million and 27 FTEs is to implement and operate the first 2 lines, the pink and lime lines. And of that 27 new FTEs, 25 are bus operators and 2 are supervisors. Additionally, there is a service increase of 3% inflationary adjustment for nonprofit service provider contracts. I indicate this here because it will be going on the new and enhanced program list, but there will be a forthcoming plan on how the council will address this 3% inflationary adjustment across the board, across the entire budget and programs for nonprofit service provider contracts. So this is not just for mass transit. This is for about a dozen programs throughout, dozen departments throughout the budget.
Right.
And then I guess we'll give the full picture again here. You can see the much larger table on page 3 of the packet. Outlines all of the changes that the county executive's budget classifies as not impacting service. However, council staff wanted to highlight 2 of those for the committee's review. First is the $262,000 reduction in the county's contribution to the Bethesda Circulator, which is a bus service operated by a contractor and administered by the Bethesda Urban Partnership. The net reduction covers an increase in base contract costs, and a reduction in service from 3 buses to 2 buses. This reduction is meant to reflect a dramatic reduction in ridership since the pandemic, while other regional transit services have recovered nearly to pre-pandemic levels. The Bethesda Circulator has remained at around 20% of pre-pandemic ridership. So this reduction is intended to reflect that reduction in ridership. Second is the proposed $1.65 million increase to bus shelter maintenance services. This is classified as a cost increase because, though not a service increase, because it maintains the same level of service, but is now being paid for by the county because of an ending of a 15-year franchise agreement between MCDOT and Clear Channel. Under that previous agreement, Clear Channel had advertising rights on bus stops in exchange for paying for the maintenance of those bus stops. After COVID-19, Clear Channel unexpectedly did not recompete for that franchise agreement, and MCDOT, despite several attempts, has not been able to secure another franchise agreement to fund bus shelter maintenance services, and so is taking on that effort themselves. And yeah, that's it for, you'll see again, the biggest ticket items on the increases that do not impact service are related to compensation adjustments.
Great.
And yeah.
So, thank you for that. So, I'm intrigued about the bus shelter maintenance service, which already garners lots of critique. Director Conklin, what is the plan there? Not only for the maintenance of, but what will riders actually be seeing if the advertising partner has pulled out?
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than what was described. That Clear Channel franchise ended before the pandemic, and was re-advertised, and there wasn't sufficient competition or anybody interested because the advertising revenue was less than the maintenance costs for the shelter. So it was broken out into two different contracts, and there's an advertising contract with Vector Media, if I have it right. So they have the opportunity to advertise in those shelters, and there's a revenue sharing agreement with the county for that advertising. And then the maintenance contract has been issued separately, and that maintenance is occurring now, but it's not directly related to the advertising anymore. So there is a revenue offset to that cost from the advertising, but that doesn't show up in these expenditures because that's on the revenue side of the equation.
And who is the advertising partner?
Vector Media?
Vector. And then what goes into the maintenance? You know, what classifies as maintenance of those facilities?
There's a couple of components. One, I'm sorry, Phil McLaughlin, Division of Transit Services. There's multiple things, but the two big ticket items are general routine maintenance, power washing, graffiti cleanup, those type of things. Then we also have panels that break. So we lose glass panels. I think the number is maybe 15 or so a month we lose in glass panels. They need to be replaced. It's a safety issue. They need to be cleared first and then replaced and cleaned up as well. So those are the two big ticket items. But there's also things related to, there's rust that occurs. Some of these shelters are nearly 20 years old. There's rust that occurs, so there's rust maintenance that goes on. There's just general tightening of the bolts and the placement of the shelter in the concrete itself.
And thank you for that. And this includes both ride-on shelters and the flash shelters, or any other shelters that?
The flash is actually separate. So the 18 flash stations are maintained separately. We have 500 shelters that we maintain. These were the shelters that, under the previous arrangement with Clear Channel, they installed over about a 15-year period.
Understood. Thank you. Colleagues?
Some follow-ups on the bus shelter. I just want to make sure. So the 1.65 million says an increase, but that's the total amount, right, that we're spending on the maintenance? Or is that in addition to something that we have been spending?
I believe there's 750 budgeted for FY24.
Gary Nalvin, OMB, we can get you the full amount if you want to request that.
Yeah, I'm just curious how much we're spending overall on the shelter maintenance. And I know, then separately, this is just for maintenance, any plans for new shelters would be a separate endeavor, correct?
Right, those are going to show up in the CIP. Right.
We'll be talking about this a little bit later today, but we did also include an increase to that CIP project for bus shelter improvements, or bus stop improvements.
Okay, so we'll talk about that when we talk about the CIP. All right, great. Did you have a question on bus shelters?
Yes.
I have another question, but we might as well just keep on one topic.
So thank you. What is the revenue from Vector? How much is that?
I believe we have 1.7 budgeted for FY25, and it was around the same number for '24 as well.
Okay. So it's pretty much the same deal that you had before. It's just, right? So this is if that's did you say 1.7?
Yeah. Get them.
Yeah, and I believe the revenue from the prior franchise arrangement netted out much less because the shelter was taken off of the top of what they grossed. So, this is kind of truing up all the budgets to be more reflective of the current contract arrangements.
Okay, thank you.
Great, and then I had a question on page 5, under Transit General Services Administration, the second paragraph, the close to $600 million or almost 30% decrease to this program? Yeah.
So this is just a result of essentially counting up the numbers in the budget. DOT has a very large personnel budget, about $140 million across transit services and general fund. When we calculate impacts of all the compensation changes and benefits, we try to do that accurately by position. Sometimes we're not able to match the number exactly when we add it up by position, so we have to add in somewhere in the budget that increase. So that's what we did in FY24, where there was a manual adjustment to the personnel costs just to put that amount in the budget somewhere, and that came out probably more accurate in FY25 now.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just wanted to mention one thing on the bus shelter and advertising. The advertising includes the on-bus advertising, which was not part of the Clear Channel deal, so it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, and Clear Channel was also installing shelters. So if you add all those components together, clearly they probably weren't making money on their franchise.
Yeah. Want to pick up on a few other points. Great Seneca Transit Network, looking forward to that. And going back to the previous conversation regarding the public safety headquarters, that is not on the Great Seneca Transitway, is it not?
It's on the second phase of the green route, which is not yet being advanced.
Okay. So clearly we're working towards providing better transit options there if all the other real estate situations don't pan out. Last point, I want 2 more points actually. One, the $100,000 reduction in the Kids Ride Free. So when we made Kids Ride Free, expanded it all the time, ridership jumped 57% in the 6 months immediately after. So what has happened since then?
So we are billed by Metro for the provisions that we provide for those. This was a truing up of the budget based on actual expenditures. So the expenditures from Metro have been a little bit less than budgeted. So we were just trying to realize the savings, and those funds could be redirected. But all of that will be, seniors ride free, kids ride free. Those budgets will be adjusted based on actual utilization over time.
So speaking of that utilization, if Mr. McLaughlin, you have this information, otherwise we can follow up. Can you share what the breakdown is between utilization of either Ride-On or Metrobus? And you said most of this is from Metrobus reduction?
Are you talking about with the kids?
Yeah.
I do not have that data in front of me. We'll be sure to get that.
But all of this is Metrobus because there's no direct
It's all
cost
Metrobus.
for the county.
That's fair. Okay. So it's WMATA, Metrobus. Would love to get more information just about that utilization, and perhaps, we just had a joint committee last week or 2 weeks ago with the Education and Culture Committee talking about safe routes to schools, and when I put forward the proposal to make Kids Ride Free a universal program all the time, part of the rationale was to better integrate or to use it as a way for kids to get to school more often, right? Instead of relying on the yellow bus, school bus, or parents. Through the conversation last week, we learned that walking is there is an inverse between age and walking and transportation, right? And the older the kids get, the more available cars are, so they're driving themselves and their friends. But would love to engage in a conversation just about, at another point, about coordinating with MCPS as they continue to experience a shortage in procurement for not only yellow diesel buses, but more importantly, the electric vehicles, and to remind them that we have a fleet that travel around our community at virtually no additional cost to students. And so it's something that we can follow up with them about as well. But appreciate that. And then last point, regarding community mobility services. Related to this, I recently had the opportunity to visit Regency and Barwood's Taxis headquarters in Gaithersburg, and I know the innovative work that they are doing with regard to mobile app and share riding and handicap accessible vehicles, retrofitting those vehicles. One of the concerns that they shared was the unlevel playing field with regard to Lyft and Uber and the regulations in which they have to compete, essentially. Is there, and we can pick this up another time, but as we're talking about transportation, is there a conversation about updating our taxi regulation codes to reflect the year 2024 and beyond?
There is. It's a work item in the director's office policy team. One of the items is the goal for 100% accessible wheelchair vehicles and whether or not that can be attained. So that's something that we're considering. We've heard both from the Commission on People with Disabilities and the industry that it doesn't appear that that's a reasonable or in fact rational goal, because there are a number of customers even with mobility impairments whom accessing the wheelchair accessible vehicle is more difficult than the sedan vehicle. So that's one element of it. We have been talking about, which would be unpopular with the taxi industry, whether or not using transportation network companies to provide some of the human services trips is needed because of the size of the fleets and the level of service that's provided by the taxi industry maybe not matching the customer demand and quality expectations. So that's an element of the taxi regulation that is being looked at. And the other element under that program, as you know, we've had the grant capital and operating grant programs for the last couple of years as the TSIF fund was elevated. There's a high balance. That balance has been spent down, so those grant funds are not being proposed going forward because we are at the place where we are slightly concerned that we don't have the grant funds needed to match the ride subsidies that are called for in the regulation, so the grant fund is going to be suspended for the time being.
Well, I'm glad to hear those are being spent down. We spent the last 2 years trying to figure out the right formula, and so we can have that conversation another time. But the last thing I just want to share regarding our taxi cab services and the unfair playing field also is the prohibition on split riding, where Uber and Lyft allow individuals to piggyback off other rides and save people money, something we can talk about at another time. But I think it is important to note that that industry is going through some changes. It has been going through some changes over the last decade, and we should update our regulations to reflect the current time that we're in and what the marketplace competition actually is. So,
and as this committee knows, we have responsibility for the taxi cab regulation, but not for the Uber Lyft regulation.
Correct. Right. Councilmember Balcombe.
Thank you. The overhead, the overtime, bus operator overtime, is that number the total cost of somebody working an overtime shift, or is it just the overtime premium?
The overtime that we incur, there's two types of overtime. One is what's scheduled overtime. So you and I work a 40-hour week, and that's traditional. Bus operator regular week is 43 hours. So there's built-in overtime there. The other is the unscheduled piece. This is what we use when we don't have enough bus operators, which was the case earlier in this fiscal year. As Chris mentioned earlier, we've made a lot of progress here, or Emil mentioned, in the past 3 or 4 months of filling those vacancies. So we're getting close to where we don't need as much overtime in the unscheduled. We likely will always have that scheduled component.
Okay, thank you. And I think,
Councilmember,
Yes.
if I may, the dollar amount that you see in here is directly an increase. One of the things a couple of years ago, if you'll all recall, we adjusted the bus operator compensation schedules, and no adjustments were made to the overtime line, so we've had to stretch that even further, so this is kind of getting it caught up with what the reality is.
Okay,
But it's the full hour and a half
Yes.
charge.
got it. And then I think on page 5, the 591, 178, that's the decrease, not million? I think that's, that would be great.
That's right, that would free up a lot of space.
That would.
No, that's
Okay.
a typo. Sorry.
Thank you.
Eagle-eyed Balcombe, that's your new nickname. Last question from me, real last question. Reimagined, Ride-On Reimagined, where are we with that?
So by the end of this month, another week or so, we should have a final report, which we will be ready to discuss with the world at that point. So you don't see items in the FY25 direct, other than Great Seneca, which we've attributed to Ride-On Reimagined, but you don't see items directly in this budget directly related to Ride-On Reimagined. You'll begin to see that next year.
Next year, so that will be reflected as you're planning, you expect that to be in the FY26 budget, not in any supplementals throughout the year to accommodate changes?
Not at this time. As I suppose it's possible, but not at this time. But it's not just FY26. I think you'll see this in years going forward. This is not a one-year implementation. We're going to roll this out over a 5 to 10 year period.
Great. We look forward to that conversation. So not seeing any other comments, we're all in agreement in
If I-
passing the Mass
If I could offer
Transit
one other
Fund?
point of
Yeah, Director.
information, the zero-emission bus transition plan is also complete and will be published within the next week or two.
Great. Lots of follow-up for the committee. Thank you. Very good. So we approve of that item. And the third item on the agenda is FY25-30 Capital Improvements Program, revised recommendations for a number of proposals, revisions that were sent over to us on March 14th. Revisions include a new project, the Seven Locks Road Culvert Replacement Project, and several other scope changes and cost changes. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Kenny.
Thank you. So these are a series of revisions that were sent over by the county executive on March 14th with the operating budget to a number of items in the capital improvements program. This packet covers all of those revisions, save for the ones relevant to parking district services. We'll cover those during our work session next week when we have all of the parking lot district staff and from both DOT and OMB present. And one other note is this packet does not include the revision to the Observation Drive project, as that revision, we had that revision in time for this committee's March 18th work session, where the committee considered the most up-to-date version, which has already now been straw vote approved by the full council. So turning to page 2, council staff has outlined all of the changes to the revisions sent over by the CIP. They're sorted by type of change, and all of the change, an overview of the changes as well as updated project forms can be found attached to this packet. So there's one new project on this list, the Seven Locks Road Culvert Replacement. This project is designed to replace two failing culverts along Seven Locks Road with larger diameter culverts to reduce the likelihood of flooding along Seven Locks Road. This project was originally begun in the bridge renovation project, where so that a portion of those funds for this project were moved out of that project into this standalone project. In addition, some new funds were added to reflect a new estimate. There were 3 scope change increases or changes. The first, as we mentioned before, to the bus stop improvements project. This increase accounts for inflationary cost increases as well as increasing bus stop replacements to address the existing backlog. The second is to the Intelligent Transit System project. This increase of funds allows for the replacement of CAD/AVL system routers as well as warranty and support payments for the existing system. And the third scope change is to the Ride-On Bus Fleet project to increase funds to comply with FTA requirements and to update the zero-emission transition plan. All of the cost change, and moving on to the cost change revisions, all of those are simple reflections of inflation as we considered for many other projects in the CIP, with the exception of the Seminary Road intersection improvement project, which is a complete project, but this revision goes back to adjust funding levels to reflect an anticipated WSSC reimbursement. So this is a sort of retroactive change. There is one schedule adjustment change, and this is to the Bethesda Metro Station South entrance project. This change reflects delays in Purple Line implementation, shifting $7.3 million from the previous FY25 to 27 timeline into FY28 to cover the full duration of the Purple Line project, to make sure project phases align better with the MTA's Purple Line project. There's one affordability adjustment change, and this is to the Falls Road Bikeway and Pedestrian Facility project. This is a reduction of $30 million, essentially ending this bikeway and pedestrian facility project while finishing out some planning and design efforts. This decision was made by the county executive to create fiscal capacity, particularly GO bond capacity elsewhere in this CIP. And finally, there are a few technical adjustments reflecting changes in funding sources within the Glen Road Bridge project, the Residential and Rural Road project, and the MCG reconciliation PDF. There are more details on each of these attached to the packet.
Thank you. I have two questions. One regarding statement regarding the Falls Road Bikeway. We had considerable conversation about that, and I believe back of the envelope math was approximately $18 million a mile or somewhere around there for that project. And so, Mr. Kenny, now that the county executive has sent over these revisions, they'll be reflected clearly in our ongoing CIP work. So we'll share that with colleagues and with staff. And then regarding the Seven Locks Road, important project, and regarding collaboration, I want to just elevate that there is a lot of work going on fundraising right now for the Scotland AME Zion Church as that is planned to be rebuilt. And knowing that the Seven Locks Road culvert replacement, I think, bookends around that property, there'll need to be a lot of coordination, particularly with the church and with the community, to make sure that everything's in tandem. And Director Conklin is nodding. So
yes, and that project is specifically designed to reduce the likelihood of flooding of that site again. And the church's own design has flood mitigation built into it, but hopefully these two things together would prevent that from occurring in the future.
Good to hear you say that is specifically the reason why this is being added. So I clearly support that. Colleagues?
I want to go back to the bus shelter since this is in the CIP, and reading the PDF, if I'm reading correctly, and this, we could also put a pin in this because it's maybe a broader topic, but it looks like we had a GIS study done in '05, which is what we're basing replacements and new bus shelters on. Is that correct?
Primarily. I mean, there is some anecdotal, staff is in the field constantly, and they get assessments. We get community feedback, we get rider feedback. So we have other information to support that, but that was the primary source for the 3,700 improvements that have been made to date.
Great. And one of the things, knowing that that study predates, are looking at equity emphasis areas and other things, maybe this is a conversation for a future date, but looking at not just, the locations where we need them and as you laid out here, but then also overlaying that with our equity emphasis areas, understanding that we have to prioritize because we can't put in all the new bus shelters at once. And so that might be just something we could overlay and look at it in terms of priorities in the future. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good. You are good. One last question I had regarding the, where is it? The intelligent transit system, which I think is integrated with the bus stops in some way. Mr. McLaughlin, can you just talk about that?
Yeah, so it is larger than just the buses, right? So
Yeah.
we do communicate to the bus stops, we communicate back to our central communications teams. It's also communicated to your smartphone, whether or not where the bus is in service. This change to what you're looking at here today is permanently tied to the routers themselves. The technology that we're using today is sound technology. It's just not the best for our operating environment. So we were recommended to go to a different form of router, and that's what we're testing right now, and that's what this cost increase reflects.
Router meaning
The communication device on the bus itself to communicate with those
the
different
bus's
systems.
router.
Yeah.
That's okay. Okay. Very good. I'm not seeing any other comments. We will support this agenda item, which is revision to the FY25-30 CIP. Thank you, DOT.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to those updates that were alluded to in the coming weeks. Very good. And then the last item on today's agenda is review of the FY25 operating budget for the Vision Zero NDA. See Mr. Holland here. This NDA funds the county executives and the executive department's work on the coordination of our Vision Zero initiative, which we all know is incredibly important as we work to reduce and end injuries and fatalities on our roadways. And so Mr. Holland has been the full-time Vision Zero coordinator coming up on 5 years? Almost. 4 years.
Depends on how you count the pandemic. It feels a lot longer, but about almost 4 years.
Almost 4 years. There you go. Appreciate the candor. That's good. And as I mentioned in the previous conversation, this committee just had a joint work session with education and culture on biking infrastructure, on safe routes to schools, on ensuring that we have better coordination. Mr. Holland, appreciate your participation in that discussion. Incredibly important. We know that there's a lot more work to do. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Kenny to preview that work.
Thank you. So the county executive recommends an overall $171,000 or almost $172,000 increase to the Vision Zero non-departmental account. Most of this increase, $160,000 of it, comes from a federal grant for Safe Streets for All. The federally funded nature of this increase means that it does not meet the requirements to be added to the new and enhanced programs list. Other increases come from the FY25 compensation adjustment and other personnel adjustments that do not impact service. I will note something that is not reflected in this packet is a $50,000, an additional $50,000 increase that was transmitted as a revision to the operating budget by the county executive. This addition will go towards engagement with traditionally limited English-speaking communities based on the La Abuelina pilot. And this will be added to the new and enhanced programs list as it does meet those requirements. So this will be the only item from the Vision Zero NDA that makes it on to that list. And council staff recommends concurring with the executive.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kenny. Mr. Holling, should we talk about the federal grant? Because I'm curious what scope of work will be covered with that.
Yeah, and so there is a matched component to this. The match is already built in the base budget. There's usually about a lot under $50,000 in the base operating budget. That's being used as the match, so that's already been built in. So there's no extra appropriation needed for that, because you're basically taking the base budget money from FY25 as that 20% match. So what's going to be used for the basically $200,000 is the kickoff of our Vision Zero action plan update. We have regular refresh points built into the Vision Zero action plan. The next major one is during 2025. So this will allow us to do kind of a SWOT analysis to really see, before we really get looking at how we want to change the plan, really taking a holistic look at all of the Vision Zero activities, bringing in a multidisciplinary team to help us really assess where our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This also was tied to an overall grant or overall project for Germantown, Safe Streets for All. We reapplied for that this round as well, based on the feedback we got from the first time we had applied for that. So that was the second time we had applied for that. Unfortunately, that was not awarded, but based on the feedback we got from USDOT, this round we're looking for more demonstration type projects as well to kind of hopefully win more awards going forward. The implementation side is very competitive. I think they said they had over billions of dollars more than they could actually fund through the implementation side. So that's where things like this, where it's plan updates, demonstration projects, in the future will have a better chance of winning those.
So if I heard you correctly, the $160,000 will essentially be used for an update, a refresh of our Vision Zero plan?
It's basically phase one of the update. Basically, before we even touch the plan and talk about what we want to change in it, we want to look and say, okay, what's working, what's not working, where are opportunities that we're either seeing or not seeing, to make that as kind of a new baseline to say, here's what we know is working, here's what's not working, here are ways that we can take that information, then I will go into a phase two of the plan, which is extensive community outreach, talking about the high injury network and those areas we need to focus on, talking to those communities as part of building that updated plan, and then also re-engaging the work groups to rebuild that plan.
Incredibly important work, so appreciate you elaborating on that. I think the more important question with regard to the budget is this $160,000 grant that we have, and it's an 80-20 match, you said?
Correct.
Is that going to be expected to be built into the base budget next year?
So for fiscal year 25, that's what's showing up here, is that basically the awarded amount. We have also applied for another round this year, and it will kind of depend on when the federal government, lets us know if we won that or not.
Sure.
But that could potentially be late 25 or fiscal year 26 if we win the next round of grants.
Right.
It's a newer program, so they're kind of changing when they award these things. So
There
we're
you
kind
go.
of
Okay.
rolling with them as they announce these things.
The difficulty therein clearly is building federal grants into our base budget, and then when we don't get the award, we are expected to pick it up and move it forward, regardless of the merits of the project and program, and this clearly is important. Last question right now before turning it over to colleagues. Last year, we passed the Safe Streets Act, and as part of that bill, that law, the executive was required to send over the automated traffic enforcement plan 180 days, which happened to be last month, March 25th. Can you share with us? We have not received that. So are there any updates as to where that automated traffic enforcement plan might be?
Yeah, so we are drafting it. One of the things we're looking at, like you said, March 25th was the initial due date. We saw it was 2 days from sine die, which was the end of the Maryland legislative session. We had about 6 to 7 bills that still had some life on them before the end, so we felt it was, instead of having, because it was a year-long plan, it made more sense to hold that plan. We had some success in terms of the vehicle noise automated bill was passed, as well as the bus lane monitoring bill passed. So we want to make sure that those new technologies were reflected in the plan that we sent over.
And so those are two things that did pass, but remind me, I do not believe that any of the bills that would have expanded our ability to deploy more automated enforcement those did not pass, right?
Unfortunately, no. That was the hard sell is expanding speed cameras in Annapolis. So we will definitely try again. We'll have to retool and think about how we approach those. But correct, the bill that would have allowed us to do speed cameras on any of the HIN networks, that made it past the House. It was on the voting list and the Senate committee that was listed in till the very last Saturday, and then it just died in committee.
Well, we got some work to do next year to have Annapolis help us keep our streets safe. But I agree with the prudence in waiting for the session to end, not knowing where these variable laws and regulations might be. So I look forward to that report when you do convey it. Colleagues?
Thank you. The La Abolina program or the equivalent, why is it one-time funding for that program?
It is one-time funding because this is based on the FEMA reimbursement. Is that correct, Mr. Kennedy?
I'm not sure, actually.
Yes, that's correct. It's the FEMA reimbursement.
Yep. So it's because it's based on that FEMA revenue stream for the COVID reimbursements. It has to be the one-time funding.
Okay, and I think to the chair's point, adding programs that next year we won't have that funding, so we need to think about when we implement this program for FY25 that we're not implementing this program expecting it to continue on. I think it's a good program, but the issue is not putting it into the base budget. So thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a follow-up question. I think that's an excellent question that Councilmember Balcombe just asked. And in the description that we were given at the La Bolina program, it would be helpful, not today, but moving forward, to know like what you think you're going to get out of that $50,000. You know, it's a great program and everything, but what do we get for $50,000? And because it is a one-time amount of funds, that would be helpful as we're moving forward in the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you. Good points. Last point I will make on this is with regard to the Vision Zero dashboard. I receive on a weekly basis frustration from folks who are trying to go online or are going online, trying to get the information at Vision Zero Data, the URL, which says that since December 31st, 2023, the non-motorist data set lacks updated information. Can you shed some light as to this discrepancy?
Yeah, so the data that we pull from, it's not a county data set. This comes from the Maryland State Police. They have a statewide system called the Automated Crash, let me see, ACRS is what the acronym is.
What's the acronym? ACRS?
ACRS, ACRS. So they basically went from a 1.0 to a 2.0 beginning of this calendar year. So right now we have to basically rebuild our systems in order to intake the new data because of all the changes that were made between 1.0 to 2.0. The state is still working on rebuilding their systems, so as they rebuild their systems, that affects how we rebuild our system. So we're still having crash reports written. We can manually pull them, but in terms of like an actual data structure, data frame, we are working to rebuild those.
How do members of the public access that information?
There's no information to access at this point because we don't have the data. The data frames are not there to be published yet.
So the state, while they've changed their outtake, there's no way to access that information from them.
Correct. So right now, like a police officer can go and access his or her reports if they've been writing them. But in terms of like a table with all the crash reports, that's what we're having to rebuild. Okay. So as what will be reflected on Data Montgomery, we'll have to rebuild our own internal systems and also potentially change how it reflects on Data Montgomery.
What's the timeline for rebuilding the site?
We don't have a definitive timeline. Our hope is by the summer, but it depends a lot on what we can get from our state partners at first.
Okay. Do we have the funding in the FY24 budget to be able to do that work? Or is that already within?
It's being done by police,
Montgomery?
yes. So it's being done with internal resources within the Montgomery County Police Department.
Oh, so it's within MCPD to do that, not Data Montgomery per se? Just trying to figure out who we need to talk to and whether it's the Vice President's Committee of Jurisdiction and GO or Public
Correct,
Safety.
yes, so there's no issue on the Data Montgomery feed, it's just that there's no data to be put up on Data Montgomery until we rebuild the feed, and then once the data feed is rebuilt for our internal purposes, then we can start pushing it up towards Data Montgomery through the automated process.
Okay, because what I know right now are people are relying on some intrepid tweeters and other feeds that they get while they would like to go to one landing page essentially, so.
And the fatal dashboard has been up. We do have the fatal dashboard that's being run by the Highway Safety Office. That has been restored and online, so that is now being updated.
Okay, let's follow up on this. We'll talk to colleagues to see how we can get this information back online so that everyone can see how well we're doing or not doing with regard to our street safety. And not seeing any other comments, we will approve the operating budget for Revision 0 NDA. Thank you very much, Mr. Holland. And Mr. Kenny, I think that's it.
That's it.
Okay. Thank you, DOT. Thank you, Mr. Holland. Thank you, OMB. And with that, the committee is adjourned.